Hello, and welcome to Making Connections with the Mathematical Teaching Practices. My name is Stephanie Kidd, and I am a special education math consultant for the Kentucky Valley Educational Co-op. Our teaching should be shaped around the mathematical teaching practices and the standards for math practices. We need to provide our students with ways to set goals, to work through problems, to persevere over them, to be productive, and to be willing to try new things. And so if we use our math teaching practices and the standards for math practices, we will have a classroom that is very inviting, very exciting, and will allow our students to develop great thinking skills. These are the 8 mathematical teaching practices that we are going to talk about today. I'm going to go in more detail for each one of these as we progress through this video. Establishing mathematical goals to focus learning. Teachers must focus on the meaningful shifts in their students' understanding, and we need to focus on learning goals and not performance goals. We also need to have a learning that is a progression and use these goals to guide our instructional decisions. We should also explain to students what they need to understand and what they should be able to do with these goals. Students need to be very active. So if we use goal setting as a strategy, students can monitor their own progress and they can become very active in their own learning. By doing clear goals and small steps toward a larger goal, we provide our students with a very good evidence of their learning, and we also provide them with any misconceptions that they may have and that they need to work toward. When students understand their goals and they know what they need to work toward, we have a greater connection with our learning and the activities and even the tasks that we're doing. So learning goals is a must. It's a way to keep our students active. They can identify their own strengths. They're learning and they understand what they're learning, and they're even having an inspiration to learn more. So making sure that we have set these goals and that we're doing what we need to do for our students, it's very important for them. And we want to make sure that during this time, we're also assessing and monitoring for understanding throughout these goals. Goal setting also involves all of the standards for math practices. So keep that in mind. When we're doing goal setting, we are involving all of the standards for math practices. Implementing tasks that promote reasoning and problem solving is very important for our students. This involves the SMP, making sense of problems and persevering to solve them. And with this, we want to make sure that students that are struggling definitely have opportunities for this, because we want them persevering and not giving up. Because if the struggling student begins to give up and they don't learn to persevere through it, then we lose them, and we don't want that to happen. So how do we get through this? Well, teachers need to motivate our students, and we need to do this by building tasks that provide our students the appropriate amount of high-level thinking with reasoning and problem solving. We don't want our students to just memorize a task or to be able to just do a procedure. We want them to truly connect with the mathematics. And in order to do this, we need to make sure that they have a deeper conceptual understanding. And many times when we give them that deeper conceptual understanding, we see that they are willing to really work through a task, and they'll choose different things, like different manipulatives, just to make sure they understand it. So that's what we want from our students. We want to provide our students with tasks that are not low level, that just provide memorization or a procedure. We want to make sure that our students are engaged in the mathematics and that they are provided high cognitive demand tasks, a task that doesn't give them that procedure to follow, and it requires them to develop their own. And when given a procedure, it includes requirements to connect that procedure to a conceptual understanding. And if they have that conceptual understanding, they can see the tools and they know the tools that they need to use. We want them to have those opportunities. And while students aren't exactly only required to engage in high demand tasks, they should regularly have that opportunity to make sure they are making a stronger achievement in mathematics and an association with the mathematics. Use and connect mathematical representations. Now, this means that we can connect them to manipulatives, to those kind of things. But the big thing is, this is also connected to the SMPs, reason abstractly and quantitatively, and also using appropriate tools strategically. Now, as a teacher, we need to select tasks that helps our students to make sense of problems, but we also need to allocate them time for them to use and discuss and to work through different representations, such as the CSA model, where they're doing concrete manipulatives and then moving on to the semi-concrete, where they're either doing drawings or they're doing virtual manipulatives, those kind of things, and then on to the abstract. And during all this, they need to understand the vocabulary, because for our students, the vocabulary is very similar to a very foreign language. And we need to make strong connections to the vocabulary in mathematics for our students to really see it. We need to make sure that we have models to show them the math in action, and that representation also includes internalizing and taking in the mathematical ideals and understanding them, and the ability to be flexible and be able to move purposefully and throughout the mathematics, and to see the different representations. And we want them to have regular opportunities to do this. We want to have them modeling and using tables and graphic images, and then of course to the symbols. We need them to learn to model using representations through graphs and through tables and the things that they see in everyday life. We also want to make sure that they're not just connected to one type of representation, that they can move beyond that and use multiple types. This is very important for our students with disabilities, and so keep that in mind, that they tend to get stuck and they can't transfer that knowledge. So we don't want that happening with our students. We want them to have multiple opportunities with multiple different types of manipulatives, with different types of virtual manipulatives, not just one particular type. Facilitate meaningful mathematical discourse. This connects to the SMP. Construct viable arguments and critique the reasoning of others, and also attend to precision. In this, we want students to engage in communication with each other and with the teacher, making sure they can explain their mathematical ideals, their reasoning, their approach to it. We want to make sure that they are able to anticipate the challenges that are coming, and they're able to select appropriate solutions and strategies. And I want to make sure that that student is engaged in the process and they're moving toward mathematical goals that we've already set. But most of all, I want them to show their understanding. Now, if one of the ways that you can look at this is the 5 practices for orchestrating productive mathematical discourse. And this is by Margaret Smith and Mary Kay Steins. And in that, they talk about anticipating what is going to be the student's response and the challenges to that mathematical task that they're going to have. And then for you to have questions to ask your students to make sure that they understand, or you understand their understanding of the mathematical practices. And also that you need to monitor their responses, not just when asked, but also when they're in small group. And Anita Archer is wonderful for this with explicit instruction, and she does this walk around, talk around. And you can look that up in Google. But in a walk around, talk around, you're walking around, you're talking to your students, you're listening for responses. They may be paired up and talking to each other, but you're listening to a response and you engage in that and you provide them with immediate feedback to their responses. you also want to make sure you're select pairing your students so that they present their mathematical thinking, and the talking through is with both sides. So student one, student two, and they're both getting a chance to have that conversation, and making sure you're listening for that vocabulary that they should be talking about. Also, make sure there's sequences in your discussions and your discourse, that they respond to the understanding of the problem truly, and also connecting it with the key mathematical ideals. The goal is to build a culture where students can lead that conversation, and that it allows them for deeper understanding and to be able to see the collective ways of working through a problem. That is our main goal, to build a conversation where students have conversations often that they really dive deep into that understanding of the mathematics, and they have many ways of working through a problem. Then they can see, oh, I worked through it this way, but so-and-so worked through it that way, and he came up with the same idea, and I can see now how he got that, and that's an easier way for me to do that problem, so I might use his way of doing that. And sometimes as teachers, we name a strategy after a student, and the kids will remember that, hey, that was Will's strategy, or hey, that was Vonda's strategy. So yeah, they can use those different strategies, and they get so excited because they develop them. In this mathematical teaching practice, we're going to talk about posing purposeful questions, and this relates back to the standard mathematical practice of model with mathematics and attend to precision. Now, as a teacher, we know that questioning is so important for our students, and whether it's a starter question or a guided question that stimulates mathematical thinking, they should be used purposefully. Another set of questions that we may be asking is assessment questions, and these ask our students to explain their thinking, how they get to a solution, and we begin to understand what level of understanding they have for a strategy or that content. This can also lead to the level of mathematical thinking that the child is on. When a child is struggling, I like to start out with, what do you see? They don't have to be you're not being judgmental at that point. It is what you see. And then from there, I like to go ahead and ask, what do you see as a pattern? And of course, if they see a pattern, what do you think is going to come next in that pattern? Or I may even go as far as to say, what do you see in that pattern that can lead you to an answer? Now, a couple other questions I like to ask are, what is the same or different from the problem before that you just worked out? And then, what do you think may come next and why? In your classroom, we need to make sure you have appropriate questions at the beginning, during, and the end of class. Now, like I said, sometimes we don't always think about questions at the beginning, the middle, and the end, but we really need to pay attention to those. And we need to have a balance of higher level thinking questions that require reflection and thought, and then lower level thinking that just is factual knowledge. Now, if you're doing factual knowledge and the kids know about it, ask those questions, but have the kids tell about it, because you've already went over that information, and the kids should be doing more talking at that point than you are. So those lower level thinking, make sure the kids are really voicing their understanding at that point. And then, of course, open-ended questions that create informal classroom discussions that require mathematical thinking and the processes that you're working through. And then also make sure that your questions engage the students in their learning. And some other things that you might want to consider when you're doing this is ask good questions that are very open-ended, not just factor calling or a procedure. And also avoid any questions that can be yes or no. Make sure those questions are for reflection and analyzing and explaining. And make sure that you have very memory-driven responses. That they can get out for factual questions, but for the others, I want them to take that learning and basically be able to tear it apart and tell you why. And then replace the lectures replace your lectures with well thought out questions throughout. And then also provide wait time. This is so critical, especially for our students that struggle or our students who have a disability that really need that processing time. Wait time is critical. I have seen students sit there and they will be like, they know the answer. They've worked through the problem. They're able to get it, but they can't process it. So saying, hey, I'll come back to that, but I'm going to go on with this other question, they will sit there and they will work on it, and you can come back to them and they'll have an answer for you most of the time, or even ask them a question that can lead them to it. I really love the fact that I watched a teacher one day and she was going through and she asked a question. She went on and did 2 or 3 questions, and the student raised his hand and he answered the question that she had actually asked him. But he had to process it, and he sat there and you could tell he was really thinking on it. He was processing it, but he was just needing that wait time for him to be able to process that understanding. So wait time is critical. It is critical. And if you're working one-on-one, provide that child with wait time. Don't push it. Don't go in there and start, trying to lead them to it. Just give them some wait time. Many times that's all they need. Build procedural fluency through conceptual understanding. This is our CSA model that we've talked about so often at the Kentucky Valley Educational Co-op. This connects to the SMPs of reason abstractly and quantitatively, look for and make sure of structure, express regularity, and repeated reasoning. Now, we can talk about this as the CSA model. Truthfully, we want the students to have opportunities to use their own reasoning strategies and methods in solving problems. We ask students to discuss, explain their procedures, those kind of things. But truthfully, when we talk about the procedural fluency from conceptual understanding, when they do it many times, many ways, they understand it so much better, and they are able to become truly fluent. They're not just procedurally fluent, but they truly understand the mathematics, and that's what we want. So, like I said before, the CSA model is perfect for building procedural fluency. You can begin with the manipulatives to build the concept, and when shown many times, many ways, as Ms. Fonda would say, they start to develop flexibility. And while doing this, it imprints into their brain through drawings or through virtual manipulatives, and therefore they retain that skill better. The CSA model requires that students practice a skill with manipulatives, then drawings or an image, and then with the abstract. And these can be interchangeable as the child needs. So they can start out with manipulatives and draw that manipulative, or draw what you see. And then they can move on from drawings to the abstract. And sometimes they may need all 3. Maybe they need to do all 3. And Vonda Adams and I created a work mat that allows that student to see all of these steps at once and can be used with any grade level. Vonda uses it for her younger kids in K through 5, and I use it with my middle school kids and my high school kids. And I'm telling you, to see them use algebra tiles and then draw out the algebra tiles and then to do the abstract with it, which is basically, just using the symbols. It's amazing to see the connections that the students create. And after a while, they may draw it and then they don't even need the manipulatives. They'll just draw it out. And then you'll see them just working out the problems, but they develop such good procedural fluency by using that conceptual understanding. And it's amazing how well they can then articulate what they understand because they've done it often. And that saying that Miss Vonda has, many times, many ways, is so true. This mathematical teaching practice is very special to me. Support productive struggle in learning mathematics. Now, working with students with disabilities, I see productive struggle all the time. And I want to say that it definitely connects with the standard math practice of making sense of problems and persevering to solve them. As a teacher, we've got to anticipate what the struggle may be. Now, do they have the prior knowledge they need? Do they not? What can I do as a special needs teacher to help that student to develop the skill and give them an opportunity to work through these problems? I want to give the student ample time to struggle so that they can ask questions, that we can scaffold their learning and their thinking without taking the work away from them. I want to make sure that they are still getting the understanding, and I want to make sure that we are helping students realize that confusion and errors are just a natural part of, working through this, that mistakes make mathematics, that they understand that it's okay to make a mistake. So productive struggle is good, and when students start to make sense of the problem, then they build an understanding and a relationship between new math and their prior knowledge. We need to make sure that students also see that they are making progress and they feel accomplishments. This takes a lot of patience and restraint, especially on my part, I'm going to tell you, but and on the part of any teacher who watches a student struggle, and some very good questioning techniques that you need to guide you. Also, during this time, don't be afraid to have the student to go back. So like in the CSA model that I've talked about prior to, maybe you've moved all the way up to you're just using the symbols, but they're still struggling with something. Well, let's go back. Let's go back all the way to the concrete if need be, and we just talk them through it again with that problem, and then they draw it, and we have more discussions and those kind of things. But don't be afraid to go back and to do it again, and make sure that they have that connection with their prior knowledge and with the manipulatives and the drawings, and also make sure that the task is not overwhelming to the student. Break that task apart and have the students work on smaller pieces of the task. This helps so much. But when that light bulb goes off and a student's been struggling with a problem, there is no greater enjoyment as a teacher that you will ever have than when that happens. So like I've said before, I have great pride for kids who struggle through mathematics and learn, and able to articulate their learning, because I've watched many a student struggle, and as a teacher, developing those skills to be able to restrain myself for one and step back and be like, okay, let's just ask some questions that's going to guide them to this, and then watch their light bulb go off is awesome. Elicit and use evidence of student thinking. This, again, connects to all of the SMPs. So, as a teacher, I need to identify what counts as evidence. I need to understand that there is evidence in their discussions, that there's evidence in when they write things or draw things. I need to understand where I'm looking for evidence at, and making sure that I respond to students with questions and prompts that probe and scaffold and extend their learning. And I want to make sure I reflect on the evidence, and that leads my planning for my next steps of instruction. Now, it is important to communicate with the students so that when moments arise during high-quality tasks, that you have questions that focus on the mathematics and have students to explain their understanding, and for us as teachers to understand that thinking and provide good corrective immediate feedback. And also to gather evidence of understanding. Simple formative assessments can work along with communication about the task. According to Anita Archer, teachers need to walk around and talk around during work, and engaging students to talk about their problem and provide quick corrective feedback that provides no judgment to the student. That feedback needs to be just corrective. And this allows the student to know that they're on the right track and kind of what to do next and what they need to be doing. We need to be constantly assessing and monitoring our students. And we can do this through many different ways. We have paddle boards in the classroom, and we have different ways that we assess. But in the virtual world, we can assess just by having small conversations one-on-one. We can assess by having students to put things in chat. We can even use our paddle boards in virtual, where you have a couple of students, if you've got a group of 10 maybe that you're working with, that on the count of 3, just like in the classroom, they stick up their board and you quickly look through your students and you see the answers that they've given and just have that conversation. There are many ways to do quick little formative assessments, and you can do those through exit slips. You can do those through a Google form. Like I said, many different ways that you can do. A Padlet is another way that you can do that. So keep those in mind when you're assessing your kids. But the big thing is to make sure that you give feedback to those instructors, and you do it fairly quickly, and you do it as a corrective feedback. So make sure that you're keeping those things in mind when we're doing this. Here's a couple of resources that you may want to use. The Principles to Action is definitely a great book to use, and if you can get that for your classroom, it would be a wonderful resource for you. I would definitely suggest looking into that. There's also an excerpt from the Principles to Action that you may want to look at on here, and it definitely talks about all the math teaching practices and the connections that it has to the standards for math practices. I want to thank you for joining us today, and thank you for everything that you do for your students. If you would like to contact me, my name is Stephanie Kidd, and my email is stephanie.kidd@theholler.org. We will holler at you later.